Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Carol. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So, is this red-blooded American crowd ready for the deep surrender? Well, actually, I can think of no more powerful or spiritual topic or more advanced a spiritual topic than the topic of surrender. And I think that's one topic that all the spiritual traditions that I can think of practice. It's a spiritual practice and it's a spiritual principle that's taught. So in ministerial school, we were introduced to the Jewish tradition, and they have a practice that's called a covenant-type religion, where the individuals and the tribes hold up their part, and the God, and he, or however you want to look at it, he, she, or the Great One, holds up their part. And the Hindu tradition, which our great leader, Dr. Ernest Holmes, our founder, said we're closer to the Hindu tradition and philosophy than any of them, because the Hindus were the ones who first came up with this concept of the unitive consciousness that's beyond all. So in the Hindu tradition, there's this great thing that we call universal spirit. They call Brahman, which is everything, the entire spiritual being, which the entire universe emanates from. And there's the individual soul, which they call Atman. And their teachings is a lifetime of surrender, of surrendering that individual soul so you can experience the universal soul. And certainly the 500 million people in the world who practiced the Buddhist philosophy, they definitely are into surrender, because the Buddha wandered in the forest of what's now India for years to decades to answer the question that no one could answer for him: why do we suffer? And he finally brought back the answer to everyone: we suffer because we have attachments. So all these different religions practice surrender. The Islam, it's the same thing. The Quran is all about that, this quiet place of surrender. And the teachings of Jesus, I'm going to talk about a little bit later, that from Ernest Holmes, how he summarized the teachings of Jesus, same thing. And this great book that we've been reading from, the book of the month, Living the Science of Mind, my dear Reverend Nicole has been giving me a hard time about that, because I just discovered this a month ago. And it's a fabulous book, and what she grew up with was that, yes, of course, there's a Science of Mind textbook, and then you have the Living the Science of Mind to refer to it and put it in more common language and help you through the tough spots. But it's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. And actually, it's great for our individual spiritual practice on a day-to-day basis, because it looks like they're old essays, 3 to 5 pages, that were compiled and put into you, so you can just pick it up anywhere and read anyone. And I'm going to read a little bit later on from the title, which is the title of the talk, The Great Surrender, where he's talking about the teachings of Jesus. But what is it that we're really surrendering, and what we're trying to do? What we're surrendering from is our focus and our fixation that the physical world controls us. Our fixation that we don't have control of our life. Because here we have this saying that if you want to change your life, you change your thinking. We believe, as the Hindus do, that consciousness is the ground of all being. And this concept of surrender can take us from where we are to where we need to be. It can take us from breakdown to breakthrough. It can take us from pain to possibility. And it can take us from the present to the future. But this concept of surrendering to our spiritual life is not what our brain was meant to do, at least initially. So about 200,000 years ago, there was something marvelous that happened to the human species that gave this creature a leg up on all the other creatures, at least from the evolutionary scale. And that was the brain was formed. However, this brain that was formed was a little bit different than the brain we have today. The scientists call it the primitive brain. And it's focused on survival, it's focused on instinct, it's focused on doing battle, and it's focused just on the individual. And the brain that we think of today, at least in part, is called the modern brain. We got that about 50,000 years ago. This brain looked a little bit at the bigger picture. It looked at collaboration, affiliation. And this modern brain, or the scientists identified as a neocortex, gives us this concept of oneness that we have throughout all of our great spiritual traditions. But the problem is this primitive brain is still with us. And especially when we're under stress, we go back to that thinking of the primitive brain. And so one of the things about the physical world is we want to be open to have our great joy and our great bliss come into our lives now and in the future. And we need to get away from thinking that the physical reality is all there is. So we have to be okay with ending things. We have to be okay with ending things because every day you're not the person you were before. You're not the physical person you were before. And Lord knows, years ago, I won't tell you how many to give away my age, I used to be a semi-pro basketball player. And I could get above the rim and stuff like that. I go to the gym now and I even try and jump. I said, are these the same damn legs that got me all the way up there so many years ago? Yeah, but we're not the same person physically we were yesterday. We don't have the same emotional relationships, family relationships we did yesterday. They've been tweaked a little bit. And it's tough because there's something called grieving when we lose people. So the born-again people back where I grew up used to tell me that I was anointed because I had never lost a person that I cared about for my first 50 years of my life. And it's a tough thing because this great, loving, spiritual community with our 200 or 250 people, I care deeply about each of you. And it's been an experience when some of you get sick or some of you make your transition. It's all part of the life experience. But that's what we need to do to get our joy to go forward. We need to understand that the physical world at best is fleeting. It's not going to be here tomorrow as it was today. And if we're looking for the physical world as it is today to take care of us, we have a responsibility to absolutely recreate it. I want to use some material from the minister I have probably the most respect for in the movement, and that's Reverend Dr. Roger Teal, who just retired from Mile High Church. And if that church sounds familiar, that's the church where Reverend Josh is one of the lead ministers now. And he's talking about this concept of surrender. And I've shared with you, and many other ministers have shared from this pulpit, the concept of the metamorphosis of the caterpillar. I want to use what Dr. Teal said about it because there's some little nuances I want to bring out. He says this. He says, there comes a time in the life of the caterpillar when the imaginal cells that hold the pattern of the higher organism are activated. They are no longer dormant. Initially, the immune system of the caterpillar fights these imaginal cells and tries to destroy them. And yet they bond together somehow and start to exchange information and somehow gain momentum until the caterpillar arrives at what scientists call critical unworkability. You see, it's unworkable to remain the caterpillar in this lesser form. And an interesting thing occurs. The caterpillar dissolves into a fluid that allows the metamorphosis to move forward to its successful completion. So what I want to do is I want to plant a seed inside of you right now, and I'll keep referring to it, that you are wired for greatness. You didn't have to do anything to understand this and to have it inside of you, just waiting to come out of dormancy, much like that cell in the caterpillar did. You have this greatness inside of you that's going to come out of it. And quoting Dr. Thiel from his book, This Life is Joy, about surrender, because when we're surrendering, we're not giving up the external fight. We're not, because it's not a fight anymore. And later on, I'm going to share what Dr. Holmes said about the teachings of Jesus, that was Jesus' message. It's about turning to the power of your spiritual life. Dr. Thiel says this: surrender rather than giving up is flowing with and opening into. It is attuning to the wisdom and being open to the possibilities that are obstructed by resistance and by forcing. Surrender is a higher level, allowing something better to emerge. It is allowing higher energies to work through us and to use us. It is an absolute faith that something greater and more wonderful than we realize is available to flow into our experience, if we are willing to welcome it skillfully and to let it be. So it's something greater that's coming into our life. And the other traditions, there's an old Chinese proverb when it talks about bad stuff happening to you. The Chinese proverb goes like this: you cannot prevent the birds of sorrow from flying overhead, but you can prevent them from building a nest in your hair. So that's because the physical world, as I said, is at best fleeting. And what we like to teach and practice here is to recreate your world from on high each and every day. And Emerson said this about us wanting things that are settled. And before I say that, there's a quote I want to share with you from Paul Tillich, who was a great Protestant theologian in the 1950s. He says the opposite of faith is certainty, meaning we want things not changing, to be certain, to be just as it was before. And unfortunately, that's the only thing that will not totally happen. And Emerson told us this. He says, people wish to be settled. It is only when they're unsettled that there is any hope for them at all. Life is a series of surprises, and the way of life is wonderful, but it is by abandonment. So to create something new, which has to happen every day, because consciousness has to recreate the world we live in every day, we have to be okay with ending what happened in the past. And in this book, Living the Science of Mind, Dr. Holmes goes into this and talks about the teachings of Jesus. He says, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And he says, that's not all about the man Jesus or some Holy Ghost that only certain people can get to. He says what Jesus was telling us, that he mastered this life experience. And what he was trying to tell us, that the way, the truth, and the life was turning to the spiritual life and letting it unfold in your own life. He said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So Jesus wasn't this doorstop, at least the one that I read about and hear stories about and have ministers tell me about. I mean, he did some great things with the loaves and the fishes. He had a lot of accomplishments. He had a busy life. He had a lot of goals, and he achieved those goals. So that's not what he meant by that. What he meant by that is the meek in heart will inherit the earth. The ones that aren't dependent on the physical world of violence, of do it to them before you do it to them. Because the meek at the heart is the one that knows the divine inside, has no doubt about it, that we are the ones to inherit the earth. And he says, we must focus on the life of spirit. What he means by that is, if we want to focus on love, we have to let something end, and we have to let hate end. If we want to bring kindness into our life, We have to let unkindness in. If we want to bring abundance into our life, we have to let this idea of not enough and separation and limited supply in, because he's telling us, which we say quite often here, we need to take it to this higher level. We need to take it to this point of surrendering to that great spiritual life inside of us. So I want to get back again to this cell inside of you that's like the caterpillar. It's this powerful, beautiful, eloquent spiritual being just sitting there dormant inside of you. And this spiritual life will in the end be what is the life for everyone. And I'll give it to you from two different perspectives. From an intellectual perspective, one of the things we like to talk about here is the creative process. That there's a natural spiritual principle that's at work in the world, and that's the spiritual principle of growth. Now, if growth is this great spiritual principle, at the end of the day, what's going to win out? Something that's destructive or something that's loving and supportive, or like we say, a world that works for everyone? From a logical perspective, I think it's the essence of love, the essence of oneness, that's going to continue to come forward. And we can look at it from a heart perspective. And just think about the people that have done great spiritual work. Somehow, some way, Mother Teresa had a cell inside of her that was dormant. And it got activated. And she recognized it and went with it. So somehow, some way, she decided to go spend the rest of her life in the streets of Calcutta. And from my perspective, what she did there is everyone she came across to, she let them know that they had dignity. Whether they were a king, whether they were a high-powered person, or whether they were a person on the street breathing their final breaths. She was there with everyone. And what about the Buddha that wandered years to decades in the forest trying to find this answer on why do we suffer? And he was dedicated and brought that back. What about Gandhi? What about all of these great people? Because when they talk about and look at what great people think about themselves while they're doing it, they don't think that they're doing anything great at the time. When you listen to the heroes, the people who saved people from plane crashes and all that, they were just saying, I'm doing my job. And I think the spiritual people would phrase it that I'm just doing here what I was called to do. I know that Gandhi has said that many a times. And they did their spiritual work, and they lived their life as if they believed that the life of spirit would create a world better than the world they were living in. So that's my challenge for you this week. Think about that seed of the caterpillar inside of you that knows your beautiful, divine, spiritual expression that's dormant, just waiting for you to trigger and to bring out. So as you go through your week, understand that. And just see if someone needs a smile, give them a smile. If they need some help, give them some help. If they allow that divinity, that great dormant seed inside of you, and stop worrying about the world and surrender to it. Because what you're surrendering to is something much more grander than anything you can find out there. Because in our belief, in our philosophy, what's out there first existed in consciousness beyond the physical world. So if you want to create something great, go within you and use that blessed and beautiful and joyful divinity that you are. God bless you and thank you.